The history of American involvement in the Philippines from 1899 to 1946 is a complex tale of war, imperial ambition, resistance, and eventual liberation. This period marked significant transformations for both the United States and the Philippines, shaping the political, social, and cultural landscapes of both nations. The journey from colonization to independence involved numerous pivotal events and key figures, set against the backdrop of global geopolitical shifts. Before delving into the American period, it is essential to understand the context of Spanish colonization and the subsequent Philippine Revolution. The Philippines had been under Spanish rule for over 300 years, a period marked by the spread of Christianity, the establishment of colonial administration, and significant social stratification. By the late 19th century, a growing sense of nationalism and a desire for independence had taken root among Filipinos. In 1896, the Philippine Revolution against Spanish rule erupted, led by figures such as Andrés Bonifacio and later Emilio Aguinaldo. Despite initial successes, the revolutionaries faced significant challenges, and by 1898, the conflict had reached a stalemate. The Spanish-American War in 1898 was a turning point in the Philippines' struggle for independence. The conflict began in April 1898, spurred by the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor and American support for Cuban independence from Spain. The war quickly expanded to the Philippines, where the United States saw an opportunity to challenge Spanish colonial rule and expand its influence. On May 1, 1898, Commodore George Dewey led the U.S. Asiatic Squadron to a decisive victory over the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay. This victory marked the beginning of American military involvement in the Philippines. In the ensuing months, American forces, alongside Filipino revolutionaries, captured Manila. The war formally ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris on December 10, 1898. Under the treaty, Spain ceded the Philippines, along with Puerto Rico and Guam, to the United States for $20 million. The treaty's ratification by the U.S. Senate in February 1899 marked the official transfer of sovereignty, but it also set the stage for a new conflict, the Philippine-American War. The Treaty of Paris was met with outrage and resistance from Filipino revolutionaries who had fought for independence, not another colonial master. Tensions boiled over into open conflict on February 4, 1899, when skirmishes broke out between American and Filipino forces near Manila. Thus began the Philippine-American War, a brutal and bloody struggle that would last until 1902. The war was characterized by guerrilla tactics employed by Filipino forces and harsh counterinsurgency measures by the Americans. The conflict was marked by atrocities on both sides, with significant civilian casualties and widespread destruction. Notable battles included the Battle of Manila, the Battle of Tirad Pass, and the capture of Emilio Aguinaldo in 1901, which effectively ended organized resistance. In 1902, the United States declared the war over, although sporadic fighting continued for several more years. The conflict resulted in the deaths of an estimated 200,000 to 500,000 Filipino civilians, along with thousands of combatants on both sides. The war left deep scars and set the tone for American colonial rule in the Philippines. With the end of the Philippine-American War, the United States established a colonial government in the Philippines, implementing a blend of direct and indirect rule. William Howard Taft, the first civilian governor-general, played a crucial role in the early years of American administration. The American colonial administration undertook significant reforms aimed at modernizing the Philippines and integrating it into the American sphere. Key reforms included: 1. Education. The Americans established a public education system modeled on the U.S. system, with English as the medium of instruction. This move aimed to create a pro-American elite and facilitate administrative control. 2. Infrastructure. Significant investments were made in infrastructure, including roads, bridges, ports, and public buildings. These projects aim to improve economic integration and facilitate American economic interests. 3. Health and sanitation. Public health campaigns were launched to combat diseases such as cholera, smallpox, and malaria. Sanitation improvements were also prioritized. 4. Political participation. Limited political participation was introduced with the establishment of the Philippine Assembly in 1907, a body of elected Filipino representatives. This move was intended to placate nationalist sentiments and prepare the Philippines for eventual self-governance. While the American administration introduced reforms, it also exploited the Philippines economically. The colony became a source of raw materials and agricultural products, such as sugar, hemp, and tobacco, for American markets. American businesses and landowners gained significant influence, often at the expense of Filipino farmers and workers. The social fabric of the Philippines also changed during this period. The introduction of American culture, values, and language had a profound impact, particularly on the urban elite and the educated class. However, traditional Filipino culture and practices persisted, especially in rural areas. The question of Philippine independence remained a contentious issue throughout American colonial rule. Filipino nationalists continued to push for self-determination, and various political movements and leaders emerged to champion the cause. A significant step towards independence came with the passage of the Tidings-McDuffie Act in 1934. The act provided for a 10-year transition period, during which the Philippines would be a commonwealth with greater autonomy, leading to full independence. Manuel L. Quezon was elected as the first president of the Commonwealth of the Philippines in 1935. The path to independence was abruptly disrupted by World War II. On December 8, 1941, just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces invaded the Philippines. The subsequent occupation lasted until 1945 and was marked by brutal repression, significant resistance from Filipino guerrillas, and immense suffering for the civilian population. General Douglas MacArthur, who had been stationed in the Philippines, famously vowed to return after being forced to evacuate in 1942. In October 1944, MacArthur fulfilled his promise by leading the Allied liberation of the Philippines. The Battle of Leyte Gulf and the subsequent campaigns were among the largest and most intense battles of the Pacific War. The Philippines was left devastated by the war, with its cities, infrastructure, and economy in ruins. The post-war period was focused on reconstruction and recovery, with significant aid from the United States. Amid this backdrop, the promise of independence was finally realized. On July 4, 1946, the Philippines was officially granted independence, marking the end of American colonial rule. Manuel Roxas was inaugurated as the first president of the Independent Republic of the Philippines. The transition was celebrated with both hope and apprehension, as the new nation faced the daunting task of rebuilding and establishing itself on the global stage. The legacy of American colonial rule in the Philippines is multifaceted and continues to influence the country to this day. The period from 1899 to 1946 saw significant changes in the political, social, and economic landscape of the Philippines, with lasting impacts on its institutions, culture, and identity. Positive legacies. 1. Education system. The establishment of a public education system and the promotion of English as a medium of instruction have had lasting effects, making the Philippines one of the largest English-speaking countries in the world. 2. Infrastructure development. Investments in infrastructure laid the foundation for future economic development. 3. Political institutions. The introduction of democratic institutions and processes provided a framework for the development of the Philippine political system. Negative legacies. 1. Economic exploitation. The economic policies of the colonial period often favored American interests and contributed to economic disparities. 2. Social stratification. The colonial period reinforced social hierarchies and inequalities, many of which persist today. 3. Cultural impact. The imposition of American culture and values led to significant cultural changes and the erosion of some traditional practices.